The senior senator from Ohio.
Thank you. I've enjoyed watching Senator Fetterman and Senator Casey and working together and the mentoring and how productive that's been for the state of Pennsylvania. Marcus Aurelius said, humility is the foundation of all virtue. Humility is the foundation of all virtue. And humility, not a common trait in this body perhaps, but humility infuses the work of Bob Casey every single day. And I've worked with his staff, my office in fact, we work with his staff perhaps more than any other office. And I feel that what he brings to this, that uncommon humility and uncommon kindness in his personal relationships with his friends in the back row here, in an uncommon kindness to the people of Pennsylvania, in an uncommon kindness with his own staff. And I love watching that little staff turnover, the kind of energy that they bring, the kind of kindness they bring. And one of the things that really brought that home to me, listening to Bob's talk a minute ago, is he concentrated on constituent service. And Bob Casey understands that to do this job, the real building blocks of this job is you help people individually. The tens of thousands of people he's helped in his offices in, I guess, Philly and Pittsburgh and I don't know where, State College, whatever all these inferior cities, inferior to Ohio cities in Pennsylvania. But what he's brought in his offices in reaching out to people, that really is the building blocks of public service. And he has been a public servant extraordinaire in the way he does his work, in the way he does his job. And he, as I said, he brings that uncommon kindness, that uncommon humility, and it infuses his work. It infuses it in constituent service. It infuses his work in fighting for economic justice. He didn't talk that much in his speech about what he's done with children and for children. I saw 3 of his daughters and Therese downstairs before the speech and got a chance to talk to them. And I've watched them grow up over these, Therese was already grown up. I watched the daughters grow up in these 18 years. And just the kind of energy and commitment to service and to people that I've seen in them has been a delight to watch. But he didn't talk all that much about what he's done for children. Nobody in this body has focused their work on children as much as Bob Casey. And it's the child tax credit for sure, but it's so many other things for disabled kids, for it's giving kids from Erie to Sharon to Philly to Bucks County, giving them more opportunity in life than they otherwise would have had. He also, one of the things that, when I think about Bob Casey, I think he's standing up for the little guy, and I've heard him talk about trips to the grocery store and how some people in this body blame inflation on government spending, which of course doesn't hold economic water. But Bob has really focused on helping me come to discuss inflation. Connie and I go to church. When we go to church on Sunday, we often stop at a nearby grocery store, and you talk to people in the checkout counter, in the checkout line, or at the meat counter, just walking down the aisles, talking about how much things cost. And Bob had this understanding. He called it shrinkflation. What he kind of taught me to say is, when you go to the grocery store, you're paying higher prices. You're paying them because of executive compensation and bonuses. You're paying for those higher prices by stock buybacks and exorbitant profits. And Bob understood that and always fought for the little guy. So I so appreciate the friendship, first of all. I appreciate the gentleness of spirit in his uncommon empathy and understanding. He always understood, in part because he goes home and listens. He doesn't go home and make a lot of speeches. He goes home and listens to people and understands their concerns. He brought them here. He made such a difference for Pennsylvanians. He made such a difference for Ohioans and people in the other 48 states too. And I will be eternally grateful for Bob Casey for that friendship, for the humility that he has shown towards his job and towards the world around him, and just for being a really, really good man.
Madam President.
The senior senator from Minnesota.
Madam President, I rise from the back row with some of my best friends back here, and to honor, like everyone gathered here today, Bob Casey, who served the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for 17 years here with honor, dignity, and yes, joy. Served before he got here, as he noted, always a public servant, and will serve after he leaves here. That we know for sure. So yes, we were this great class of freshman senators together. And if I do remember when Bob first led the Senate in the Pledge of Allegiance, is this not correct, the day after we got sworn in, there was someone who was particularly rule-bound that worked here at the time. Bob finished, he thought he had done such a good job. He comes back to his seat and she... I'm really telling it. And she says to him, you know what, Senator, in the United States Senate, when we say the Pledge of Allegiance, we put our hand over our heart. He said, well, that's what I did. She said, no, you were doing it like you were getting sworn in again. He went like this. Then I remember what? It was a true story, thank you. That is one of my virtues. I remember our first day of our first classified briefing. We had no idea what we were doing. And they said, well, you just go by right at this statute, left at this painting, right at the thing. The two of us are wandering through the halls of the Senate. We get completely lost. We're going to miss the classified briefing. And all of a sudden, we see a group of Minnesotans coming over. And they just stop. And they go, look, it's Amy, and she has a guard. So not missing a beat, your Senator Bob Casey goes all full Secret Service on us and plays the part. We have been friends ever since. And I think so many people here see Bob as their friend. So many people in Pennsylvania see him that way. Therese and Bob were over with us last night, and I got to watch the video of his post-election day, and one of his neighbors, just man on the street, interviewed, who said, well, yeah, I've always been a Republican, but Bob is such a good neighbor, so I voted for him. I think that's a lot about Bob. You know, in 1977, Minnesota's happy warrior, Vice President Hubert Humphrey, and this is the ultimate compliment from Minnesotans, and he said this: the moral test of government is how the government treats those who are in the dawn of life, treats those who are in the twilight of life, and treats those who are in the shadows of life. From the moment Bob Casey got to this place, he saw that as his job, always looking out for people who didn't have a voice, always looking out for people who couldn't afford to hire a lobbyist, always looking out for people when no one else was listening. He did that. He looked out for seniors and people with disabilities with the ABLE Act. And I have been with him when people have come up and told him that because of Bob Casey and his leadership on that bill, when no one else was caring about it in the U.S. Senate, they have a savings and they have a future life. He headed up the Aging Committee, looking out for people in the twilight of their life. He fought to bring down prescription drug costs. He stood up for kids on child care when no one else was doing it, looking out for people in the dawn of their life. He made adoption easier for Americans looking to start families, and that is barely scratching the surface. We have worked on 150 pieces of legislation together, but who's counting? And we're still friends. But what has made Bob truly a good friend is you can actually trust him. In an environment where you tell people things and you tell them, don't tell anyone, and the next day it's either in the news or a colleague down the hallway is saying, hey, I heard about this. Not Bob. He keeps your trust. And that way he's been to me like a brother I never had. His friends trust him, his family trusts him, the people of Pennsylvania trust him. And I will add, maybe that has something to do with this incredible family of his. 7 brothers and sisters, 4 daughters. That must have been a time growing up. And of course, Therese. When you put all those names in the record, I thought it was going to be your entire family, and it was going to take up the day's records. So we want to thank you, Bob, for everything you've done. We can't wait to hear what you do next. Thank you for your public service. Thank you for being a true public servant. Thank you.
Mr. President, Madam President.
The senior senator from New Jersey.
Thank you very much, Madam President. So much niceness headed towards this guy. It's killing me over here. I want to clear the record, and I have a beef to settle with the good senator from Pennsylvania. I will tell you this, I consider myself a person of faith, and I think that Senator Bob Casey has done something very irreligious, if I must say. I know he grew up as a Catholic. I grew up in a Baptist church. We're both Christians, very different religious faiths. But I have an issue with Bob Casey because the organizing Bible verse that I used to tell people that was how I motivated my life, I come here and you completely eviscerate my allegiance to this Bible verse. And so I'm using this, and forgive me, and I might be Rule 19 by somebody for maligning a colleague, but I'm very upset that you have made me lose my religion a little bit. And I'll give you an example, if you know. Point of order? No? Will the senator yield? No, I will not. Matthew 25 is really one of the Bible verses that has, for so much of my life, motivated me. And you know, then the Lord said, I saw thee as hungry, and you fed thee, or were you thirsty, did you give me a drink? And it ends with this, in verse 40, and then you shall answer and say unto them, verily I say to you, insomuch as you have done to the least of these, my brethren, you have done to me. The least of these is how I thought that was the calling of my faith, to do unto the least of these. And for 10 years now, 11 years I've been in the Senate, you have undermined that idea of doing unto the least of these. Now look, Bob, you, if I may call you that, sir, I came into the Senate thinking that was our job. But I've watched you for 11 years never see anyone as least. You have this way of looking at everybody and seeing their grandeur. You see people not as that they are in a lower station in any way, but you have a way of seeing people as if they are a reflection of the divine themselves. I had a very humbling experience in the past 7 days with a good senator from Iowa, and we were down in the basement of Dirksen when people from the disability community from Pennsylvania and from all around America came to give you tribute. And as I sat there welling up at the tributes to you from these extraordinary Americans, every person that spoke and that I spoke to afterwards told me that you saw them, that you were a person that recognized their humanity, that recognized their strength, that saw their character, capabilities, and that you were not doing to any least, but that you were elevating everyone and this nation in the process. You pointed out when you remarked about the little lobbyists and how powerful they were in saving health care for all Americans. And so I want to tell you in my farewell to you after your speech that when I was coming out of college, my greatest hero in America was not a senator or a politician. It was Marion Wright Edelman. I thought that should be the calling of this country, to focus on children. And I love what Marion Wright Edelman said. So much of America's tragic and costly failures to care for all of its children stems from our tendency to distinguish between our children and other people's children, as if justice were divisible. I see this framing that has made humanity suffer for thousands of years, of those who frame humanity in us versus them. You have this superpower to only see just us. It's not your family and my family. We are family, to try not to sound like a famous song. Somehow, my friend, You make real the words of one of my favorite poets, Gwendolyn Brooks, who simply said, "We are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond." I look up to you, Bob. I see in you, if you ask me what's the difference between a Hollywood heartthrob, or what does Bob Casey have in common with a Hollywood heartthrob, I would say nothing at all. You are not sexy. You are, not glamorous. My church tradition, you had charismatic leaders in the pulpit giving great speeches. You must have gone to a very boring church. But somehow you made me aspire to know in the Senate the difference between celebrity and significance, the difference between a show horse and a workhorse, the difference between some nobility that you feel that you are reaching out and reaching down to help others, to humbling yourself before God's creations. I end with this framing. Marion Wright Edelman inspired me at the beginning of my career, and the way you have focused on children inspires me amidst my middle-aged years as a senator. I still am inspired by people who care about kids. That's why you've been one of my greatest heroes. And so to steal from Chris Coons, who is the one person I think that knows Swahili in this chamber, I would like to end with some Swahili words. The Maasai warriors have this incredible tradition. These are the people that are most valued in their defense of those in the village who might not be able to defend themselves, who are powerful in their fierce fighting capabilities and fight for those who are powerless. When they are out and about, they have a greeting that they say to each other. And the greeting, if I'm pronouncing it right, and Chris Coons will correct me later, is Kasirian Ingira. And that translates, this is the greeting, two warriors, when they see each other, they greet each other, Kasirian Ingira, and what it means, and the response is Septai Ingira, which it means, one warrior says to the other, "How are the children?" And the response of two warriors is, "The children are well." This is the indicator for the Maasai people of what the strongest, what the most powerful, what the fearsome fighters are most focused on, which is the children. You, my friend, are one of the greatest warriors I have ever served with. I know your heart, I know your moral compass, I know how you live your faith every single day, and how much you've deepened mine. In the words of the Maasai, I have two words to say. Asante sana. Thank you very much.
Okay. That's not for her. Madam President.
The junior senator.
Madam
from
President, I
Delaware.
rise in defense of my colleague from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Bob Casey is sexy. Being fully bald is not the sole indicator of one's celebrity or sexiness. And although an inspiring quote was just delivered by my dear colleague from our neighboring state of New Jersey, that was not Swahili. And I ask leave to conduct the rest of my remarks today in Kiswahili. I'm kidding. I will just briefly say of my dear friend and colleague, of my neighbor, traveling companion, partner, and source of inspiration, that long before I imagined I could ever be a senator, I served in local government in Delaware and knew that there was, to our north, a son of Scranton who was someone who was deeply grounded in his family, in his faith, and in a sense of justice. Some mistake Senator Casey for not only not being sexy, but for not being a fighter. And one of the things I have held most closely to as I have tried to conduct myself in this chamber and in this work of being a senator with humility and dignity and kindness is that it is possible, in fact, daily demonstrated, that someone like Senator Casey, who is humble and unassuming, who is generous and kind, who sees everyone, who treats all of us with respect, to still be fierce and to still be determined and to still be a fighter and to still be someone who sees righteousness and refuses to yield. There was, attributed to St. Francis, an important saying, I think: preach the gospel at all times. When necessary, use words. Senator Casey's walk through this life, alongside his incredible blessing, Therese, alongside the amazing blessing of Elise and Julia, Caroline and Marina, and those two great grandsons, has been a walk of dignity and fierceness. To fight for the 5 freedoms for children, to co-author the Global Food Security Act, to be someone who crafts legislation that touches people all over our country and the world, is to deliver on the promise and the call of the gospel. From your time as a Jesuit volunteer, from your days at a dance at Holy Cross, from the days that you have spent here and crisscrossing the Commonwealth, you have shown with the heart like a lion that you are every bit the fighter that those who are more known on Twitter and TV, and that you are every bit as fierce. We had the blessing of traveling with you, my wife Annie, who is from Pennsylvania, and I with Therese and Bob. And what you just said about the importance of fighting for Ukraine and Ukrainians and of seeing everyone and of caring for them, we got to see in the joy that you brought to delivering relief to Ukrainian children, refugees in Tbilisi. This place will not be the same without my colleague from Pennsylvania. I have never campaigned harder for a colleague. I have never been more disappointed at an outcome, and it has never seemed more unjust to me than the days we must face ahead without this son of Scranton, who has not just counted his blessings before us today, but who has been a blessing to us every single day. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The Democratic whip.
Madam President, I want to add a few words to the tribute to you, Bob. And just to take another angle, if I might, I've been fortunate enough to join you in campaign in your home state. I remember your first campaign and a trip that I took to try to help, and it ended with a party at the end of the day. And if I'm not mistaken, it was a bank that had been converted into some meeting hall, maybe answer in. A bar. More appropriate. And I recall standing there with your friends and family, having a drink and a good time, and I'm thinking to myself, I could back up a big truck right to the front door here, ask everyone to take their drinks and walk on, take them to the Beverly section of Chicago, open the door, and they could continue conversation without any interruption. It was an Irish, Catholic, largely Democratic group. They would have been just as comfortable in the environs of Chicago and many other places in this country. But what I remember is how many members of your family were there. I think you filled the place with family members. And it told me an awful lot about the Casey name in Pennsylvania. It wasn't just a legend, it was more than that. It made a difference in the lives of so many different people, and it inspired you into public service. I think that was probably the beginning of your commitment to where you've reached in your career: family, faith, and a sense of fairness. I went back on a bus trip on another one of your campaigns, and that's when I met Lieutenant Governor candidate John Fetterman, and a lot of other your friends. We went through Bucks County and other places. I've seen you in Chicago. You look just as much as home as you would in the state of Pennsylvania. And I think it speaks to what I understand in politics. Family, faith, and fairness can take you a long way, and you've made a career out of it. What you've been able to do is to reach out and help people who otherwise wouldn't have had a fighting chance. And that, in my mind, and yours too, is why we're here today. I want to close in this brief remark and just make note of a mutual friend of ours that we talk about all the time. He's a fellow in Philadelphia that I turned to in 1992 to be my political advisor, a fellow named Saul Shore. And I know that he loves you as a politician and a friend, and dedicated so much of his life's work to your success. And I know that your defeat hurt him as much as it does all of us. But you'll be remembered here, and you'll inspire others. And a new generation will follow, and they'll say, we're keeping up the Casey name. We're standing up for what Bob Casey stood for: family, faith, and fairness. Thanks, Bob, for being a great friend and a great senator.